Ma'am, step out of the truck and keep your hands where I can see them. The flashlight beam cut through the rain like a blade, bouncing across the black Freightliner parked on the shoulder of Interstate 40. Red and blue lights pulsed against the wet asphalt, painting the desert highway in violent flashes of color that stretched for miles into the Arizona darkness. Naomi Brooks sat behind the wheel without moving, both hands resting calmly at 10 and 2, her expression unreadable beneath the soft glow of the dashboard. The diesel engine hummed low beneath her boots, steady and controlled, almost like breathing. Outside, Officer Ryan Mercer adjusted his utility belt and glanced toward his partner with the smug confidence of a man who had done this too many times before. Deputy Cole Bennett stood several feet behind him near the patrol SUV, one hand hooked lazily near his holster while rainwater dripped from the brim of his cap. License and registration. Mercer barked again, louder this time, tapping the side of the truck with his flashlight. Naomi slowly lowered the driver's side window. Cold rain and desert wind rushed into the cabin. Officer, she said quietly, her voice smooth and even. What exactly am I being stopped for? Mercer smirked. You crossed the fob line back there. Naomi's eyes flicked once toward the mirror. Empty highway. No traffic for nearly half a mile. She already knew the answer before he gave it. Illegal stop. Fishing expedition. Same story, different state. Mercer leaned closer, flashlight aimed directly at her face now. Problem with following instructions? Naomi reached calmly into the overhead compartment and handed down her paperwork without argument. Mercer barely glanced at it before looking back at her CDL. Naomi Brooks, he read slowly. Atlanta, Georgia. His eyes swept across the interior of the truck. Folded blanket. Thermos cup. Route log stacked neatly beside the seat. You hauling alone tonight? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She watched the reflection of Bennett in the side mirror instead. The deputy was circling wider now, scanning the trailer doors with exaggerated suspicion like he hoped to discover something dramatic enough to justify the stop afterward. Naomi had seen the routine before. Too many times. Mercer shined the flashlight deeper into the cabin. You deaf or something? He asked. I asked if you were alone. Yes, officer, Naomi replied calmly. Just me. Mercer chuckled under his breath and took a slow step back. Funny thing about truckers, he muttered toward Bennett loud enough for her to hear. They always act nervous when they've got something to hide. Naomi finally moved, but only enough to rest one hand lightly near the steering wheel again. Every motion was controlled. Measured. Intentional. Rain hammered against the windshield harder now, turning the patrol lights into blurred streaks of red and blue across the glass. Somewhere far out in the darkness, thunder rolled over the desert mountains. Mercer looked up at the truck again, jaw tightening slightly. Something about Naomi unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she held eye contact too steadily. Maybe it was the absence of fear. Most drivers argued, apologized, panicked, or tried too hard to cooperate. But this woman just sat there breathing evenly like none of this mattered. Like she had already calculated every angle of the situation before he even walked up to the cab. Mercer straightened. Step out of the vehicle. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Am I being detained? That question changed the air immediately. Bennett stopped pacing near the trailer and looked over. Mercer's smile faded just a little. Rainwater dripped from the flashlight onto the pavement between them. Ma'am, Mercer said slowly now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Naomi looked at the bodycam clipped to his chest. The small red indicator light was off. Then her eyes shifted once toward Bennett. His bodycam was off too. When she spoke again, her voice stayed calm, almost gentle. You should turn those cameras on, officers. For the first time since the stop began, either cop said a word. Rain slid down the windshield in crooked silver lines as Naomi Brooks stepped carefully out of the Freightliner and onto the shoulder of Interstate 40. Gravel crunched beneath her work boots. The cold desert wind pulled at the sleeves of her dark canvas jacket, while the massive truck idled behind her, engine vibrating softly through the wet pavement. Officer Mercer watched her closely now, flashlight still trained on her chest like he expected one wrong movement. But Naomi moved with slow precision, calm enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Bennett circled toward the rear of the trailer, his boots splashing through shallow puddles beside the tires. "Keep your hands visible," Mercer ordered. Naomi raised them slightly away from her sides without protest. Her eyes scanned the highway once. Empty. No witnesses except the storm and the endless black stretch of Arizona desert. Somewhere overhead, a semi-horn echoed in the distance before fading back into the rain. Mercer flipped through her paperwork with growing irritation. "You own this rig?" "Lease purchase," Naomi answered. 3 more payments and it is mine." Mercer gave a dry laugh. "Long way from Georgia." Naomi did not respond. He studied her face again beneath the flickering patrol lights. Late 30s maybe. Strong posture. No shaking hands. No frantic explanations. Most people became nervous once uniforms surrounded them on a deserted road after midnight. But Naomi stood there breathing steadily as if she had spent years learning how to remain calm under pressure. Mercer hated that kind of composure. Bennett suddenly called out from near the trailer doors. "Hey Ryan, come look at this." Mercer walked toward the back while Naomi remained beside the cab, rain soaking slowly into the shoulders of her jacket. Bennett pointed toward the metal latch. "Seal looks newer than the manifest timestamp." Mercer narrowed his eyes immediately, sensing opportunity. Interesting. Naomi already knew where this was going. She had crossed 22 states in the last 14 months hauling refrigerated freight, dry goods, emergency supplies, and construction equipment. She knew the language officers used when they wanted probable cause badly enough to invent it. Mercer turned back toward her. "What exactly are you hauling tonight?" "Medical supply equipment. Albuquerque delivery. Arrival window 6:30 a.m. Mercer smirked. "Mind opening the trailer?" Naomi looked directly at him. "Do you have a warrant?" That answer tightened something in Mercer's jaw. Bennett folded his arms near the trailer and shook his head with exaggerated annoyance. "Why do they always make things difficult?" he muttered. Naomi ignored him. Rainwater rolled from the edge of her hairline down the side of her cheek, but her eyes never left Mercer. For a brief second, the officer noticed something strange again. Not fear. Not anger either. Assessment. Like she was studying him the same way experienced mechanics listen to engines before diagnosing the problem. Mercer stepped closer until he stood only a few feet away. "You got military family or something?" he asked suddenly. Naomi blinked once. "Why?" "Because you stand like somebody trained you." The highway wind swept hard across the shoulder, rattling the reflective mud flaps beneath the trailer. Naomi glanced briefly toward Bennett again. The deputy was restless now, pacing near the patrol SUV with impatient energy. Then she looked back at Mercer. "People who spend enough time alone on the road learn awareness," she said quietly. Mercer stared at her another moment. Something about her answer unsettled him more than if she had argued. Most drivers tried to shrink themselves during stops like this. Naomi somehow seemed taller standing in the rain beside flashing lights and armed officers. Bennett suddenly slammed the trailer door once with his palm. "We can search it right now," he snapped. "I know she is hiding something." Naomi finally shifted her gaze toward him fully. Her expression stayed calm, but her voice dropped lower now, quieter than the storm around them. "Deputy," she said, "you should be careful about making assumptions in the dark." Bennett scoffed, but Mercer noticed it immediately. The way she said it? Not threatening. Not emotional. Just certain. And for reasons he could not explain yet, that certainty crawled under his skin like cold water. The rain eased into a cold mist that drifted across the highway like smoke, but the tension around the freightliner only tightened. Officer Mercer stood near the trailer with one hand resting on his belt. While Deputy Bennett paced circles through the flashing patrol lights, his impatience growing more obvious by the second. Naomi Brooks remained beside the cab without speaking. Water dripped steadily from the edge of her jacket onto the gravel shoulder below her boots. Behind her, the diesel engine continued its low mechanical rhythm, steady enough to feel almost human in the silence. Bennett suddenly pointed toward the trailer again. "Open it!" Naomi looked at him calmly. "Not without legal cause." Bennett laughed sharply. "You hear that, Ryan? She thinks she is a lawyer now." Mercer did not laugh this time. His eyes stayed fixed on Naomi's posture instead. Something about her still felt wrong to him. Not dangerous exactly. Just controlled in a way most civilians were not. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, economical, almost practiced. Even standing in the rain for nearly 20 minutes, she never shifted nervously or crossed her arms against the cold. She simply watched. Calculated. Bennett stepped closer toward her now, boots crunching over wet gravel. "You people always think the rules do not apply to you." The words hung in the damp desert air for a moment. Naomi's expression did not change, but Mercer noticed her eyes sharpened slightly. Bennett kept going, fueled now by his own irritation. "Driving around the country in the middle of the night acting suspicious, refusing searches, questioning officers like you know better." Naomi finally answered, her voice calm enough to make Bennett sound even louder by comparison. "Knowing your rights is not suspicious, Deputy." Bennett scoffed, and shook his head. "See? Attitude." Mercer glanced briefly down the empty interstate again. A pair of headlights appeared far in the distance before disappearing behind the curve of the highway. The storm clouds above the desert rolled low and heavy, trapping the red and blue patrol lights beneath them like warning flares. Mercer stepped closer to Naomi again. "Listen carefully," he said. "We can make this easy or difficult. That depends on you." Naomi looked directly at him. "It already became difficult when your cameras stayed off." Bennett muttered something under his breath and looked away. Mercer's jaw tightened. For a brief second, the only sound was rain tapping softly against metal and the distant rumble of thunder beyond the mountains. Then Naomi noticed it. A small faded sticker near the edge of Mercer's flashlight handle. United States Marine Corps. Old. Worn down from years of use. Her eyes lingered on it only half a second before returning to his face. "How long were you enlisted?" she asked quietly. Mercer blinked. "What?" "The Marines." She nodded once toward the sticker. "For years?" Mercer stared at her now with visible confusion. "How did you know that?" Naomi shrugged faintly. "You still square your shoulders before giving commands." Bennett rolled his eyes. "Oh great. Now she is profiling us." But Mercer no longer seemed amused. Naomi's voice had changed something. Not because she sounded impressed. She did not. She sounded observant. Clinical almost. Like someone recognizing patterns from long habit. Bennett stepped toward the trailer latch again with growing frustration. "I am done wasting time." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "Deputy," she said softly, "if you touch that trailer without authorization, your department will have a problem much larger than me." Bennett laughed again, but it sounded thinner now. Less certain. Mercer noticed it too. The strange thing was not what Naomi said. It was the absolute calm behind it. No bluff. No panic. Just certainty. The kind that usually belonged to people who already knew exactly how situations ended before everyone else caught up. Mercer looked at her carefully beneath the flashing patrol lights, and for the first time that night, a quiet thought moved through the back of his mind. Maybe they had stopped the wrong truck. The wind shifted hard across Interstate 40, carrying cold desert rain against the side of the freightliner with a steady hiss that sounded almost like static. Naomi Brooks stood motionless beside the truck while Officer Mercer stared at her with growing uncertainty. Behind him, Deputy Bennett had stopped pretending to inspect the trailer, and was now openly irritated that the situation was no longer unfolding the way he expected. Red and blue. Patrol lights flashed endlessly across the wet highway, reflecting off chrome mirrors, puddles, and the polished black surface of the trailer doors. Somewhere in the distance, another semi rolled through the storm, its headlights glowing briefly before disappearing back into darkness. Bennett suddenly stepped forward again. "I am done asking." His boots splashed through the shallow water gathered near the shoulder as he reached toward the trailer latch with obvious frustration. Naomi watched him carefully but did not move. "Deputy," she said quietly, "do not do that." Bennett turned halfway toward her with a mocking grin. "Or what?" Naomi's eyes lifted slightly toward the patrol SUV behind them. The dashboard camera light inside the windshield was dark too. That made 3 disabled recordings now. Her voice remained calm. "You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your career." Bennett laughed loudly this time, trying too hard to sound confident. "You hear this, Ryan? She thinks she runs the scene now." Mercer did not answer immediately. Something about Naomi's tone bothered him more with every passing minute. She never raised her voice. Never threatened. Never begged. Even standing alone on a deserted highway after midnight surrounded by armed officers, she carried herself with the same measured calm as someone sitting in a waiting room. Bennett grabbed the trailer latch anyway and yanked hard. The heavy metal handle clanged sharply against the trailer door before locking back into place. Sealed. Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose. "Federal medical cargo," she said. "Tampering without authorization creates a documented chain violation." Bennett rolled his eyes. "You think anybody is going to care about paperwork at 2 in the morning?" Naomi finally looked directly at him. "The insurance investigators will." That answer landed differently. Mercer noticed it immediately. Bennett hesitated for the first time all night. Just enough to reveal uncertainty before irritation covered it again. Mercer stepped between them slightly. "Maybe we should just finish the citation and move on," he muttered quietly toward Bennett. The deputy looked at him in disbelief. "Seriously?" Mercer kept his voice low. "Something is off here." Bennett glanced back toward Naomi with visible annoyance. "What is off is that she keeps acting like she knows something we do not." Naomi heard every word. Rainwater dripped steadily from the ends of her hair while she watched the 2 officers under the flashing patrol lights. Then, very calmly, she spoke again. "Officer Mercer." He turned toward her automatically. "Your partner keeps escalating because he thinks control comes from intimidation." Mercer frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" Naomi tilted her head just a fraction. "Real control looks quiet." The desert wind pushed hard across the highway again, rattling the reflective road signs nearby. Mercer stared at her. Something about the sentence felt strange coming from a truck driver standing in rain beside a cargo trailer. It did not sound rehearsed. It sounded lived. Bennett scoffed loudly and pointed toward the patrol SUV. "I am calling this in. We will get narcotics down here if we have to." Naomi nodded once. "Please do." Bennett blinked. That answer clearly was not what he expected. Naomi continued before either officer spoke again. "And when dispatch asks why your body camera stayed off during an unauthorized roadside detention, make sure you answer honestly." Silence crashed over the scene harder than the storm itself. Mercer instinctively looked down at the dark camera clipped to his chest. Bennett did the same. For several long seconds neither man moved. The only sound was rain striking metal and the low diesel rumble from Naomi's truck idling beside them like a machine patiently waiting for the truth to catch up. Deputy Bennett's face hardened beneath the flashing patrol lights as the rain continued falling across the empty Arizona highway. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Officer Mercer stood beside the patrol SUV staring at the dark body camera clipped to his chest while Naomi Brooks remained beside the Freightliner with the same impossible calm that had unsettled them from the moment the stop began. The diesel engine behind her vibrated softly through the wet asphalt, steady and low, almost like a heartbeat underneath the storm. Bennett finally broke the silence with a sharp laugh that sounded forced even to himself. "You know what?" he snapped. "I am tired of this attitude." He reached for the radio on his shoulder and pressed the button hard. "Dispatch, requesting additional support on Interstate 40, mile marker 192. Static crackled through the speaker before a dispatcher answered faintly through the rain. Mercer rubbed one hand across his jaw, clearly uncomfortable now. "Cole," he muttered quietly. "Maybe we should slow this down." Bennett ignored him completely. His frustration had shifted into something more reckless. Naomi noticed it immediately. People under pressure always revealed themselves eventually. Some became loud. Others became careless. Bennett had become both. He stepped toward Naomi again until only a few feet separated them. You think you are smarter than everybody out here because you memorized a few legal terms? Naomi looked at him steadily. No, Deputy. Her voice stayed level. I think people should be treated lawfully. Bennett scoffed. There it is. He pointed toward her truck angrily. Every single time. Mercer glanced around the highway uneasily now. The storm clouds had lowered so much that the world beyond the patrol lights looked swallowed by darkness. Then another sound drifted through the rain. Tires. A second vehicle approaching slowly from the eastbound lane. Headlights emerged through the mist before a large semi-truck eased onto the shoulder nearly 100 yards behind Naomi's Freightliner. The driver did not exit immediately. Instead, the truck remained idling quietly with amber marker lights glowing against the storm. Naomi noticed Bennett glance toward it with irritation. Great, he muttered. Audience showed up. Mercer looked more nervous than annoyed now. Maybe we should wrap this up before somebody starts recording. Naomi heard that too. She almost smiled, but not quite. Bennett suddenly pointed toward her again. Hands behind your back. Mercer turned sharply toward him. What are you doing? Detaining her until backup arrives. Naomi remained perfectly still. On what charge? Bennett hesitated half a second too long before answering. Obstruction. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time that night. You cannot invent probable cause because you are embarrassed. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could have. Mercer exhaled slowly and stepped closer to Bennett. She is right, he muttered under his breath. We do not have enough. Bennett looked at him in disbelief. You serious right now? Rainwater streamed down the side of his face while anger tightened every word. She has been challenging us for 30 minutes. That is not illegal, Naomi said quietly. The second truck driver finally climbed down from his cab in the distance holding a phone chest high, camera pointed toward the flashing patrol lights. Bennett noticed immediately. Panic flickered across his face before irritation swallowed it again. Fantastic, he muttered. Now we got social media involved. Naomi watched the distant phone recording through the rain. Then she looked back at Mercer. Officer, she said calmly, this situation still has a way to end professionally. Mercer swallowed hard. For the first time all night, he looked less like a man in control and more like someone realizing the ground beneath him had started to shift. Bennett, however, looked trapped inside his own anger now. He stepped closer again, voice sharper than before. You know what your problem is? Naomi held his gaze silently. Bennett shook his head. You stopped acting afraid. The desert wind swept across the highway once more, carrying the cold scent of rain and diesel fuel through the darkness. Naomi answered so softly that both officers had to listen carefully to hear it. Fear is useful in combat, she said. But panic gets people hurt. Mercer froze. The word combat lingered in the air between them like a warning neither officer fully understood yet. The rain finally began to weaken, fading from a hard desert storm into a thin, cold drizzle that drifted across Interstate 40 like smoke under the patrol lights. Everything felt quieter now. Even Deputy Bennett had stopped talking. The second truck idled farther down the shoulder with its headlights glowing softly. Through the mist while the driver continued recording from beside his cab, phone raised steadily toward the scene unfolding in the darkness. Naomi Brooks stood beside her Freightliner without moving, water dripping slowly from the edge of her sleeves onto the gravel below. Officer Mercer stared at her differently now. The confidence he carried earlier had started to thin beneath the weight of uncertainty. Combat. The words still echoed in the back of his mind. He studied Naomi more carefully than before. The straight posture. The controlled breathing. The way her eyes tracked movement without appearing nervous. Suddenly details he ignored earlier no longer felt ordinary. The scar near her wrist. The faded tan line where a watch had once sat for years. The habit of standing with her back angled slightly instead of fully exposed. None of it matched the image of a tired long-haul truck driver stranded on a rainy highway. Mercer swallowed hard and glanced toward Bennett. The deputy looked angry, but beneath the anger was something else now. Confusion. The kind that appears when people realize they may have misunderstood a situation from the beginning. Naomi finally shifted her gaze upward toward the dark Arizona sky. The clouds above the desert had started breaking apart slowly, revealing faint moonlight behind them. Wind swept across the open highway carrying the smell of wet asphalt, diesel fuel, and cold desert air. For a long moment nobody spoke. The silence itself became heavy. Mercer looked down at the inactive body camera on his chest once more before finally reaching up and pressing the power button. A small red light blinked alive. Bennett noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. Mercer kept his eyes on Naomi. "Fixing a mistake." Bennett looked away, jaw tightening. Naomi watched the camera activate without expression. Then, very calmly, she nodded once. "That was the right decision." The words were simple, but Mercer felt something shift inside him anyway. No sarcasm. No triumph. Just acknowledgement. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Most people in this situation wanted revenge the moment authority cracked. Naomi did not seem interested in humiliating anyone. She only wanted the situation corrected. The second truck driver lowered his phone briefly and leaned against his cab, still watching from a distance. The highway had become strangely still now, almost suspended in time beneath the fading storm. Bennett finally spoke again, though his voice sounded smaller than before. "Who are you?" Naomi looked at him for several seconds before answering. "Just somebody trying to get home." Bennett shook his head slowly. "No. That is not what I mean." Naomi glanced once toward the horizon where faint silver light had begun touching the edges of the clouds. Dawn was still far away, but the night no longer felt endless. "People see uniforms and assume power," she said quietly. "Sometimes they forget discipline matters more." Mercer listened carefully now. Every sentence she spoke sounded less like an argument, and more like experience pulled from somewhere far older than this highway stop. Bennett shoved his hands into his jacket pockets against the cold wind. "You talk like military." Naomi did not answer immediately. The Freightliner engine rumbled softly behind her, while rainwater slid off the chrome mirrors in slow, steady drops. Then she finally looked back at the officers. "Some lessons stay with you long after the uniform comes off." Silence returned again, deeper this time. Mercer felt it settle over the empty highway like fog. For the first time all night, the flashing patrol lights no longer felt powerful. They just looked small against the vast darkness of the desert around them. Naomi stood there beneath those lights without fear, without anger, without panic. Calm. Steady. Like someone who had already survived far worse things than two officers with bad judgment on a rainy Arizona road. The distant glow of approaching headlights appeared through the thinning rain just after 1:30 in the morning. A dark state police SUV rolled onto the shoulder behind Mercer's patrol vehicle, its emergency lights flashing amber instead of red and blue. Gravel crackled beneath the tires as the vehicle came to a slow stop near the second truck driver still recording from a distance. "Officer." Mercer straightened immediately. Deputy Bennett looked relieved at first, but the feeling vanished the moment the driver's side door opened. Captain Dana Reeves stepped out into the cold desert wind wearing a dark rain jacket over her uniform, silver hair pulled tightly beneath her cap. Even from 50 feet away, her presence changed the atmosphere. Mercer swallowed hard. Reeves was internal field operations. She did not respond to routine traffic stops in the middle of the night unless dispatch believed something had already gone wrong. Rainwater tapped softly against the hood of the patrol SUV as she walked toward the scene, eyes scanning everything with quick practiced precision. The inactive dashboard camera. The second witness truck. The body camera on Mercer finally running. Then her gaze landed on Naomi Brooks standing quietly beside the Freightliner. Reeves slowed slightly. Something unreadable crossed her face for only a second before she looked back toward Mercer. "Explain." she said simply. Mercer hesitated. Bennett jumped in immediately. Suspicious vehicle behavior, refusal to cooperate, possible cargo issue. Reeves listened without expression. Body cameras were disabled? Silence. Bennett shifted uncomfortably. Mercer answered quietly this time. At the beginning, yes, ma'am. Reeves looked disappointed more than angry. Somehow that felt worse. Then her attention returned to Naomi. The trucker stood motionless beneath the fading rain, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. Reeves studied her posture carefully. 1 long second passed. Then another. You prior service? She asked suddenly. Bennett blinked in confusion. Mercer looked over sharply. Naomi answered calmly. Yes, ma'am. Reeves narrowed her eyes slightly. Army? Naomi nodded once. Retired. The wind swept across the highway carrying mist through the flashing patrol lights. Reeves stepped closer now, studying Naomi's face more carefully beneath the weak silver glow of the breaking clouds. What unit? Bennett looked irritated already. Mercer looked nervous again. Naomi remained silent for a moment before answering. 75th Ranger Regiment attached operations. Reeves stared at her. Attached where? Naomi's expression never changed. Joint Special Operations Command. Silence hit the highway like another storm front. Bennett frowned, clearly not understanding yet. Mercer did. His face lost color almost immediately. Reeves looked at Naomi another few seconds before speaking again, quieter this time. Name? Master Sergeant Naomi Brooks. Retired. Reeves inhaled slowly. Then she looked toward Mercer and Bennett with an expression that instantly drained whatever confidence remained in either man. Do you two have any idea who you stopped tonight? Bennett opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mercer stared toward Naomi like he was seeing her for the first time. Reeves reached toward the tablet clipped inside her vehicle and pulled up a personnel database. The glow from the screen reflected across the rainwater still gathered on her sleeves. She read silently for several moments before looking back up. Delta Force Selection. 14 Overseas Deployments. Bronze Star with Valor. Bennett's eyes widened. Mercer looked physically sick now. The second truck driver lowered his phone slowly, stunned into silence himself. Naomi did not react to any of it. That seemed to affect Mercer more than the military record itself. No pride. No ego. No attempt to intimidate them. She simply stood there in a worn canvas jacket beside a freight truck in the middle of the Arizona desert, while the truth settled around everyone else. Reeves closed the tablet carefully. Officers, she said quietly, you treated a decorated combat veteran like a criminal because you assumed weakness. Bennett stared at the wet pavement. Mercer could not seem to look Naomi in the eye anymore. The storm had nearly passed now. Above the highway, clouds drifted apart just enough for pale moonlight to spill across the desert floor. And standing beneath that cold silver light, Naomi Brooks somehow looked even calmer than before, as if none of this had ever been about proving strength at all. The highway had gone almost completely quiet by the time Captain Dana Reeves lowered the tablet back into her vehicle. The storm clouds continued drifting apart overhead, revealing thin strips of moonlight that stretched across the wet desert like silver ribbons. Officer Mercer stood beside the patrol SUV with rainwater still clinging to the shoulders of his uniform, but the authority he carried earlier had vanished completely. Deputy Bennett looked smaller somehow, his anger replaced by the hollow expression of a man realizing he had crossed a line long before understanding the person standing in front of him. Naomi Brooks remained beside the freightliner with both hands resting loosely near the pockets of her jacket. The diesel engine behind her rumbled softly in the cold night air, while steam lifted faintly from the wet pavement beneath the truck. Captain Reeves studied the scene for another long moment before speaking again. You stopped a decorated veteran transporting federal medical cargo with disabled cameras and no documented probable cause. Her voice stayed calm, but disappointment sharpened every word. Mercer looked down immediately. Bennett rubbed one hand across the back of his neck without answering. Reeves turned toward Naomi. Master Sergeant Brooks, she said quietly, I need to ask whether you wish to file a formal complaint tonight. The second truck driver farther down the shoulder raised his phone again slightly, waiting for the answer. Mercer finally looked up, tension visible across his face. Bennett stared silently at the dark highway beyond the flashing patrol lights. Naomi did not answer right away. Instead, she looked out across the empty Arizona desert where the rain had finally stopped completely. Wind moved softly through the sagebrush beyond the guardrail, carrying the distant hum of interstate traffic somewhere far beyond the darkness. Then she looked back toward the officers. I spent most of my adult life overseas, she said quietly. I have seen what happens when people with authority stop respecting limits. Nobody interrupted her. Even the highway itself seemed still now. Naomi continued calmly. Real leadership is not about control. It is about restraint. Mercer swallowed hard. The words hit him differently coming from someone whose military record carried more weight than either officer could fully understand. Reeves folded her arms against the cold wind. That still does not excuse what happened here. Naomi nodded once. No, ma'am. It does not. Bennett finally forced himself to speak. I thought. His voice faded. He looked embarrassed even trying to explain himself now. Naomi watched him steadily. You thought I would panic, she said softly. Bennett said nothing because it was true. Mercer closed his eyes briefly before looking toward Naomi again. I should have stopped this earlier. Naomi held his gaze for several seconds. Yes, she answered honestly. The simplicity of the response seemed to hurt more than anger would have. Reeves glanced between all three of them beneath the fading patrol lights. There will still be a report, she said firmly. And Internal Affairs will review the camera violations. Mercer nodded immediately. Bennett stared down at the wet asphalt in silence. Naomi looked toward the second truck driver recording from a distance, and then back toward Reeves. I am not interested in destroying anyone's career, she said quietly. Both officers looked up at that. Naomi continued. But people remember nights like this. Especially when they are treated like suspects before they are treated like human beings. The wind swept softly across the highway again, rustling the reflective safety vest hanging inside Mercer's patrol vehicle. Reeves watched Naomi carefully now with something closer to respect than authority. After everything you have done for this country, she said, you still chose patience tonight. Naomi glanced once toward her Freightliner. Patience keeps people alive. Silence settled over the highway again, but this time it felt different. Not tense. Heavy. Honest. Mercer finally stepped forward slowly, his voice lower than before. Ma'am, he said carefully, I owe you an apology. Naomi looked at him for a long moment beneath the fading lights and cold desert sky. Then she gave the smallest nod. Not triumphant. Not forgiving everything instantly. Just acknowledging that, for the first time that night, someone had finally chosen humility over power. By the time the first pale streaks of dawn appeared above the Arizona horizon, the storm had disappeared completely. Interstate 40 stretched across the desert in long silver lines still damp from the night rain, reflecting the fading patrol lights and broken flashes across the pavement. The air felt colder now, cleaner somehow, carrying the scent of wet earth and diesel fuel through the quiet morning darkness. Captain Dana Reeves stood beside her SUV finishing the final notes on her tablet, while the second truck driver climbed back into his cab after lowering his phone at last. Officer Mercer remained near the shoulder with his hands resting against his belt, silent and exhausted, his earlier confidence replaced by something heavier. Deputy Bennett had barely spoken in nearly 20 minutes. He stared out toward the open desert like he was trying to understand how the night had unraveled so completely. Naomi Brooks walked slowly back toward her Freightliner, boots crunching softly across the wet gravel shoulder. The chrome along the side of the truck caught the first hints of sunrise now, glowing faint orange beneath the awakening sky. She placed one hand against the driver's side door for a moment without climbing, and yet. Behind her, Captain Reeves approached quietly. Master Sergeant Brooks. Naomi turned slightly. Reeves held out her paperwork along with the commercial license Mercer had returned earlier. You are clear to continue your route. Naomi accepted the documents with a small nod. Reeves hesitated before speaking again. For what it is worth, the department needed this wake-up call. Naomi looked toward the patrol vehicles behind them. People usually do not notice small abuses of power, she said quietly, until they become habits. Reeves nodded slowly because she understood exactly what Naomi meant. Mercer finally stepped forward then, stopping several feet away like he no longer trusted himself to stand closer. The early sunlight exposed every trace of exhaustion on his face now. Ma'am, he said carefully, I keep thinking about something you said earlier. Naomi waited silently. Mercer glanced briefly toward the horizon before continuing. You said real control looks quiet. Naomi nodded once. Mercer swallowed hard. I thought authority meant making people comply. Naomi studied him for a moment beneath the soft dawn light. Authority without discipline becomes fear, she answered gently. And fear spreads fast. Mercer lowered his eyes again. The sentence settled over the empty highway heavier than any lecture could have. Nearby, Bennett finally looked up from the pavement, but he still could not bring himself to speak. Naomi did not push him. Some lessons arrived loudly. Others arrived in silence. The Freightliner engine roared softly to life as she climbed back into the cab. Warm amber light glowed behind the windshield while air brakes released with a long steady hiss into the cold desert morning. Captain Reeves stepped aside from the shoulder and watched quietly. Mercer removed his cap briefly as Naomi adjusted her mirrors. Bennett stood frozen beside the patrol SUV, staring at the woman they had misjudged from the very beginning. Naomi looked down at them one final time through the open driver's side window.